The basement of the Boston Public Library breathed with mechanical patience, its climate control systems maintaining a gentle, constant whisper that had become as familiar to senior archivist Elena Vasquez as her own heartbeat. Amber preservation lamps cast pools of warm light across the long tables, their honey-colored glow creating islands of safety in the carefully restored archive. Here, beneath the weight of the sleeping city above, time moved at the pace of paper and patience, measured in the soft rustle of turning pages and the quiet click of archival tools against wood. Elena began her evening ritual with the practiced grace of someone who understood that reverence was the most essential skill in her profession. The newly arrived cache of corporate documents waited on her workstation, their water-stained edges and faded letterheads telling stories of survival that matched the broader narrative of the Commonwealth itself. These particular files had been discovered just 2 weeks prior, salvaged from a collapsed financial district office building, where a Brotherhood patrol had found them sealed within a miraculously intact filing cabinet. The irony was not lost on Elena that some of humanity's most important records had survived the Great War, not through grand preservation schemes, but through the simple accident of a stuck drawer and a building's stubborn refusal to completely surrender to time. She donned her thin, archival gloves, a gesture both protective and respectful, before lifting the first document toward the light. The RobCo letterhead emerged from shadow, like a photograph developing in solution. Its once bold corporate logo, now appearing as a gentle whisper of blue ink against cream paper that had aged to the color of old honey. Elena had handled thousands of pre-war documents during her 3 years of restoration work, but something about these particular files felt different, more deliberate in their survival, as if they had been waiting patiently for someone who would understand their significance. The document in her hands was a routine maintenance report dated October 15th, 2077, just 8 days before the bombs fell. Most of the text followed familiar corporate patterns: equipment serial numbers, system diagnostics, performance metrics that spoke to the methodical precision of pre-war industrial processes. Elena's trained eye moved across the bureaucratic language with the ease of long practice, noting the careful balance between technical accuracy and administrative efficiency that characterized the best corporate documentation of the era. Then she paused, her finger hovering over a small notation in the lower section of the form. Beneath the standard maintenance codes, someone had added a single word in neat handwriting: sparrow. The term was followed by a numerical designation, SP2077Q415, that suggested systematic organization rather than casual annotation. Elena felt the familiar stirring of archival intuition, that subtle sense that routine documents might contain extraordinary revelations for those patient enough to look closely. In 3 years of handling RobCo materials, she had never encountered this particular designation. She set the maintenance report aside with careful precision and reached for the next document in the stack. This one bore the distinctive blue and gold letterhead of Vault-Tec Corporation, its cheerful optimism somehow both touching and heartbreaking when viewed through the lens of post-war knowledge. The document was an internal memorandum dated October 12th, 2077, discussing routine protocol updates for Vault communication systems. Elena read through the standard technical language, noting Vault-Tec's characteristic ability to make even complex engineering concepts sound approachable and user-friendly. The corporation had always excelled at translating technical complexity into human terms, a skill that had served them well in marketing their underground sanctuaries to a nervous pre-war population. But as Elena reached the 3rd paragraph, her attention sharpened with the same gentle focus she brought to all her archival work. The memo mentioned Sparrow protocols in passing, embedded within a sentence about routine system maintenance, as if the term carried established meaning within the corporate hierarchy. The context suggested these protocols were not new implementations, but rather existing procedures being updated as part of standard quarterly reviews. The phrase appeared without emphasis or explanation, assuming the reader's familiarity with something that should have been proprietary to a completely different corporation. Elena moved to her workstation, where her primary research terminal hummed quietly to life. The pre-war RobCo system cast a soft green glow that complemented the amber preservation lamps, its engineering providing a stability that newer Commonwealth technology often lacked. As the system completed its startup sequence, Elena noticed something that made her pause in the act of reaching for her cataloging stylus. There, nested quietly beneath the standard operating protocols in the terminal's status display, was a maintenance tag she had never observed before: Sparrow. The designation appeared in the same systematic format she had just discovered in the maintenance report, SP2077Q415, as if the terminal itself carried memory of that October afternoon when someone had made a careful notation on a routine form. Elena settled back in her chair, feeling the weight of discovery settling around her like a familiar blanket. This was the moment every archivist lived for, the instant when seemingly unrelated documents began to reveal their hidden connections. She had learned long ago that the most important revelations rarely announced themselves with fanfare. Instead, they whispered through repeated terminology, synchronized dates, and shared formatting conventions that suggested coordination where official records claimed only competition. She opened her research journal to a fresh page and wrote the date at the top in her careful handwriting. Below that, she added a single word: Sparrow. The evening stretched ahead of her, filled with the promise of methodical investigation. Elena adjusted the preservation lamp's angle and prepared to examine each document with the patient attention that had made her one of the Commonwealth's most respected archivists. As she worked through the remaining files, the pattern became more pronounced. References to compatibility protocols and unified standards appeared in both corporate archives, using identical phrasing that suggested shared authorship rather than independent development. The dates clustered around the same October timeframe, as if both corporations had been working from synchronized schedules toward coordinated goals. Outside, the October night settled over the ruins of Boston, but within the gentle hum of the archive, time moved at the pace of discovery. Elena made careful notes of each anomaly, each shared reference, each suggestion that the supposed rivalry between RobCo and Vault-Tec might have masked something far more collaborative. The documents spoke in quiet voices about secrets that had waited 2 centuries to be properly understood, and Elena found herself looking forward to tomorrow's systematic cross-referencing with the anticipation of someone about to solve a puzzle that would reshape her understanding of pre-war corporate relationships. The amber lamps continued their steady glow as Elena prepared her materials for morning examination, the soft hum of preservation systems promising that these fragile whispers from the past would be safely maintained until dawn brought fresh light to illuminate their hidden meanings. Morning arrived as a gentler rhythm of the same mechanical whisper, pale squares of daylight sliding down the stairwell glass to meet the amber islands where Elena had arranged her work with the precision of someone who understood that reverence was the foundation of all meaningful discovery. The basement held the night's coolness, tempered by the constant breath of climate systems that had maintained their patient vigil over the documents through the dark hours. Elena unlocked the protective covers from her workstation with a quiet slide, checked the blotting paper she had positioned to wick moisture from the most fragile sheets, and verified that the careful parade of weights keeping curled edges flat had held their positions through the night. Nothing had shifted. The calm continuity pleased her in the way that small confirmations of order always did. She prepared her morning tea with the same methodical attention she brought to her archival work, warming water on the archive's small heating coil, while the kettle's low murmur answered the gentle conversation of the ventilation systems. The steaming cup would grow lukewarm beside her elbow as she worked, forgotten in the deeper satisfactions of discovery. Elena donned her thin archival gloves and adjusted the preservation lamps to complement the strengthening daylight, creating pools of illumination that would reveal details without stressing paper fibers that had already survived 2 centuries of patient endurance. The first document of her morning examination was a RobCo engineering specification, dated September 28, 2077, its corporate letterhead emerging from shadow, like a photograph developing in gentle solution. Elena positioned the pages beneath her magnification lens and began reading through what appeared to be routine technical documentation for robotic maintenance protocols. The language followed familiar patterns of corporate engineering writing, precise, systematic, designed to eliminate ambiguity in implementation. But as Elena moved deeper into the specifications, she encountered a phrase that made her pause and reach for her research journal with the quiet excitement of recognition. Compatibility protocols must maintain unified standards across all integrated systems, the document stated, using language that struck Elena as oddly specific for what should have been internal RobCo procedures. The phrase carried an assumption of coordination with external systems that seemed inconsistent with the competitive corporate environment that pre-war media had portrayed. Elena made a careful note of the exact wording and the document's date before reaching for the next item in her morning queue, a Vault-Tec procurement memo dated October 3rd, 2077, just 5 days after the RobCo specification. As Elena examined the Vault-Tec document through her magnification system, she felt the familiar stirring of archival intuition that preceded significant discoveries. The memo discussed equipment orders for vault construction projects, filled with the routine language of corporate purchasing departments. But embedded within the technical requirements, she encountered the same phrase that had caught her attention in the RobCo document. Compatibility protocols must maintain unified standards across all integrated systems. The identical phrasing was not merely similar, it was exact, down to the specific arrangement of technical terms and the particular emphasis on unified standards. Elena opened her research terminal and began a systematic search through the digital archives she had compiled over 3 years of restoration work. As she input search parameters for compatibility protocols and unified standards, the terminal's processing systems hummed with the quiet efficiency that made pre-war engineering so remarkably enduring. The results appeared on her screen like pieces of a puzzle assembling themselves, revealing references to compatibility protocols in 17 different documents spanning both corporations, clustered primarily in the final months of 2077. The pattern became more pronounced as Elena traced connections through engineering specifications, procurement orders, and internal memoranda. A RobCo service manual, dated October 8, 2077, contained a section that made Elena sit back in her chair and then lean forward again to confirm she had read correctly. The heading read, Secure Preservation and Read-Only, Window Protocols, SPARROW, and the accompanying text described a sophisticated system for data encryption, secure network access, and controlled information exchange between geographically disparate facilities. The language was far too complex and specific for routine maintenance procedures, outlining instead a framework for secure data sharing that implied coordination between distinct corporate entities. Elena cross-referenced this discovery with her Vault-Tec materials and found an internal memo dated October 10th, 2077, that referenced project convergence compatibility requirements. The memo discussed technical specifications with the same precision she had observed in the RobCo Sparrow documentation, using terminology that assumed familiarity with systems that should have been proprietary to a competing corporation. The term project convergence itself suggested a deliberate coming together, a planned synthesis of technologies that contradicted the public narrative of corporate rivalry. As the morning progressed and natural light strengthened across her workspace, Elena's investigation revealed evidence that extended beyond shared terminology into the realm of coordinated logistics. She discovered shipping manifests that showed both corporations receiving deliveries from identical vendor lists on synchronized schedules, as if their procurement departments were working from coordinated purchasing plans rather than competitive market strategies. A particularly revealing document was a Vault-Tec logistics report that detailed delivery schedules for specialized equipment, with vendor codes that matched simultaneously fulfilled RobCo orders. Elena traced one specific example with the patience of someone who understood that details were the foundation of truth. A RobCo outbound manifest listed 12 crates of diagnostic arrays scheduled for October 10th, while a Vault-Tec receiving record showed 12 crates of calibrated test fixtures received October 11th, with weight and dimensions that matched precisely. A week later, the pattern reversed. Vault-Tec shipped environmental control sub-assemblies on October 18th, and RobCo logged receipt of prototype airflow channels on October 19th. Using the kind of euphemistic language engineers employed when describing something without quite naming it. The coordination was too precise to be coincidental, and Elena found herself building a lattice of small, verifiable connections that painted a picture far different from the corporate competition that pre-war media had portrayed. She aligned dates with dates, phrasing with phrasing, cross-referencing vendor stamps that showed the same chipped corner, like a tiny continent replicated across different corporate letterheads, that served as an inadvertent signature of shared supply chains. Even the smallest details contributed to the emerging pattern. Elena discovered that both corporations used the same specialized packaging materials, identified by density codes like 3.2b, that appeared on manifests from both companies. These codes were too specific to be industry standards, suggesting instead that both corporations were working from shared templates that had never appeared in public documentation. As Elena prepared her notes for the deeper investigation that her morning's work had made necessary, she felt the satisfaction of an archivist who had moved beyond surface observations into the realm of systematic discovery. The documents were revealing a story of unprecedented collaboration, masked by the appearance of competition, with the Sparrow protocols serving as just one element in a larger framework of coordination that had operated beneath the public narrative of corporate rivalry. The evidence suggested that RobCo and Vault-Tec had maintained parallel development schedules, shared technical standards, and coordinated procurement strategies throughout the final months before the Great War. What remained was to understand the technical architecture that had made such collaboration possible, and Elena turned toward the service manuals and engineering documentation that would reveal the deeper structure underlying these surface patterns. Late morning light settled across her workspace as Elena arranged the technical manuals she would need for the next phase of her investigation. The RobCo Service Compendium and Vault-Tec Protocols binder sat side by side like partners in a conversation that had been interrupted 2 centuries ago and was now ready to resume. The gentle hum of the archive's systems provided a steady backdrop as Elena prepared to follow the quiet logic that would, in time, reveal not just what Sparrow meant, but how it fit into a larger vision of technological cooperation that had transcended the boundaries of corporate competition in ways that would reshape her understanding of pre-war innovation entirely. The RobCo service compendium settled into Elena's hands with the substantial weight of pre-war engineering precision, its synthetic leather binding releasing the faint scent of preservation chemicals and old ink that had become as familiar to her as the archive's gentle mechanical breathing. She positioned the manual beneath her magnification system, adjusting the amber preservation lamps to complement the strengthening daylight that filtered down through the basement's sealed windows. The pages opened with the careful whisper of paper that had survived 2 centuries through the simple virtue of being properly made, each sheet bearing the methodical typography that characterized the best of pre-war technical documentation. Elena turned to the section marked Advanced Protocol Management, guided by the reference codes she had discovered in yesterday's maintenance reports. The organization reflected the systematic thinking that had made RobCo engineering legendary throughout the Commonwealth. Each procedure documented with thorough attention to both implementation and underlying purpose, as if the manual's authors had understood that future technicians would need to grasp not just what to do, but why each step mattered within the larger architecture of technological cooperation. The revelation emerged with the gentle clarity of a photograph developing in solution. There, nested within a comprehensive table of system acronyms, she found the expansion that transformed yesterday's mysterious notation into something far more significant. SPARROW. Secure Preservation and Read-Only Window. The designation sat quietly in alphabetical order, but the technical specifications that followed spoke with entirely different gravity, describing a sophisticated framework for controlled information exchange that prioritized transparency and mutual benefit over competitive advantage. Elena traced the system's architecture through detailed flowcharts that revealed Sparrow's elegant approach to balancing cooperation with legitimate corporate interests. The protocols created what the documentation described as permeable boundaries, secure channels that allowed specific types of sensitive data to flow between RobCo and Vault-Tec systems, while maintaining strict access controls and comprehensive audit trails. Every query was logged, every data transfer was recorded, and every session was bounded by synchronized time limits that prevented any single access from becoming an intrusion. The technical design showed remarkable foresight in its attention to long-term functionality. Sparrow sessions operated through a dual-key system where both participating corporations maintained separate authentication tokens, requiring mutual consent for any data exchange. The protocols included provisions for atomic time synchronization, tamper-evident logging, and what the manual described as glass wall separation, a metaphor that captured the system's essential philosophy of allowing observation without permitting alteration. Elena adjusted her position and reached for the Vault-Tec protocols binder, her movements deliberate and unhurried as she prepared to examine the corresponding documentation. The Vault-Tec materials described identical Sparrow implementations using the same technical terminology and referencing the same system architecture, but presented in the corporation's characteristically approachable style that softened technical edges without diminishing their significance. Where RobCo documentation spoke of audit tape spooling, Vault-Tec described immutable ledger assurance, but the underlying mechanisms were precisely the same. The evidence of joint development became undeniable as Elena cross-referenced implementation details between the two manuals. Both corporations had contributed to SPARROW's design, working under shared project designations that appeared nowhere in public corporate records. Engineering notes revealed regular coordination meetings, synchronized development timelines, and collaborative problem-solving sessions that had created not just a communication protocol, but a unified approach to secure data sharing that transcended traditional corporate boundaries. Elena discovered evidence of extensive testing programs where Sparrow protocols had been refined through careful experimentation across both corporate networks. The documentation showed successful data transfers, shared research findings, and coordinated compatibility reviews that had maintained seamless integration between RobCo's automation systems and Vault-Tec's environmental controls. Technical logs revealed a rhythm of collaboration extending back at least 18 months before the Great War, with weekly synchronization sessions and monthly system updates that created persistent, reliable channels for cooperative innovation. What struck Elena most profoundly was the system's emphasis on ethical implementation. The engineering specifications included extensive provisions for user consent, data transparency, and system accountability that went far beyond typical corporate data management practices. Sparrow had been designed with careful attention to its impact on human communities, incorporating safeguards that preserved individual autonomy, while enabling the kind of collaborative research that neither corporation could achieve independently. The technical manuals revealed that Sparrow was just one element of a much larger framework for corporate cooperation. Elena found references to standardized manufacturing specifications, shared quality assurance procedures, and coordinated testing protocols that had enabled seamless integration of RobCo and Vault-Tec technologies. Rather than competing to create incompatible systems that would lock customers into single-vendor solutions, both corporations had invested in creating technologies that worked better together than either could achieve alone. As Elena prepared her notes for the next phase of investigation, she reflected on how technical documentation could reveal truths that corporate communications deliberately obscured. The Sparrow protocols represented not corporate conspiracy in any malicious sense, but rather an unprecedented experiment in collaborative innovation that had prioritized human welfare over competitive advantage. The system's architecture embodied principles of mutual respect, transparent operation, and careful stewardship that suggested both corporations had recognized their responsibilities toward the communities that would depend on their technologies. The afternoon light was beginning to shift toward the warmer tones of late day as Elena arranged the financial records and procurement documentation that would reveal how RobCo and Vault-Tec had funded and organized their collaborative efforts. The technical manuals had shown her what these corporations had built together, a sophisticated framework for secure cooperation that had operated beneath the surface of public rivalry. Now she needed to understand the economic and organizational structures that had made such extensive collaboration possible in a competitive marketplace, tracing the paper trail that would illuminate the business architecture underlying one of pre-war America's most remarkable examples of corporate partnership. The gentle hum of the archive's climate control systems provided a steady backdrop as Elena prepared to follow the financial threads that would complete her understanding of how apparent competitors had created lasting frameworks for mutual benefit. Their patient mechanical breathing, a reminder that some of the most important discoveries emerged not from dramatic revelations, but from the careful attention to details that connected past wisdom with present understanding. The financial ledgers settled into Elena's hands with the substantial weight of pre-war precision, their pages releasing the faint scent of preservation chemicals and aged ink that had become as familiar to her as the archive's gentle mechanical breathing. The afternoon light had shifted into warmer tones, casting honey-colored illumination across the numerical columns that would reveal the economic architecture underlying the technical collaboration she had discovered in the morning's patient work. Elena arranged the documents with the same methodical attention she brought to all her investigations, creating parallel timelines that would allow her to trace the flow of resources between RobCo and Vault-Tec with systematic precision. She began with the quarterly reports, those comprehensive financial statements that captured the rhythm of corporate operations in careful detail. The RobCo Q3 2077 report opened beneath her magnification system like a map of industrial complexity, its expenditure categories revealing the delicate balance between research investment, manufacturing costs, and strategic partnerships that characterized successful pre-war corporations. Elena traced her finger down the columns of vendor payments, noting familiar names of established suppliers, alongside newer entries that suggested expanding business relationships, guided by purposes not immediately apparent from the surface documentation. What emerged through patient cross-referencing was not the expected pattern of competitive procurement, but rather a complex web of shared investments and coordinated funding streams that operated beneath the surface of corporate rivalry. Both RobCo and Vault-Tec had maintained relationships with identical networks of specialized suppliers, but their ordering patterns showed coordination that transcended coincidental market timing. Where RobCo had placed orders for precision actuator assemblies in early September, Vault-Tec had simultaneously ordered the environmental control systems that would manage those same actuators, using purchase orders that referenced matching project codes with the casual familiarity of established procedure. Elena discovered a particularly revealing example in payments to North Star Thermoplastics. A RobCo invoice listed polymer housings, graded by heat tolerance, with delivery schedules that stepped across the month in even intervals. Attached to the same folder, she found a Vault-Tec procurement order to North Star, placed 3 days later, specifying environmental control enclosures, with identical material codes and a notation about mutualized quality thresholds. The synchronization was too precise to be coincidental, and the shared terminology suggested both corporations were working from coordinated specifications rather than independent design requirements. The pattern repeated with gentle insistence throughout the financial records. Elena traced payments to Keystone Elastomerics, where RobCo had purchased pressure seals, while Vault-Tec had ordered door gaskets, both using the same specialized material grades and both bearing the same distinctive vendor watermark, a small notched triangle that appeared across different corporate letterheads, like an inadvertent signature of shared supply chains. The coordination extended to delivery schedules, quality specifications, and even the specialized packaging materials identified by density codes that were too specific to be industry standards. As Elena moved deeper into the quarterly summaries, she encountered a name that would prove central to understanding the financial architecture of collaboration: Prometheus Strategic Solutions. The consulting firm appeared in both RobCo and Vault-Tec financial records with remarkable regularity, receiving substantial payments that were categorized under different headings, but followed synchronized schedules that suggested coordinated services. Elena found quarterly payments to Prometheus dating back over 2 years, with amounts that indicated comprehensive strategic support rather than routine consulting. The financial records revealed Prometheus as a sophisticated intermediary that had created what the documentation described as permeable boundaries between the two corporations. Statements of work detailed services like knowledge transfer framework, Sparrow session scheduling, and compatibility audits, convergence coded systems, language that spoke not of espionage, but of careful facilitation. Elena discovered that Prometheus had developed legal frameworks allowing both corporations to contribute proprietary technologies to shared projects while maintaining clear ownership of individual innovations, creating space for research programs that combined RobCo's automation expertise with Vault-Tec's environmental systems. The elegance of the arrangement became clear as Elena traced how payments flowed through carefully, structured channels that preserved competitive appearances while enabling unprecedented cooperation. Prometheus had served as a neutral repository for shared technical artifacts, using what their documentation called escrow protocols to hold sensitive materials until all participants agreed to release them. The consulting firm had created mechanisms for sharing development costs, coordinating manufacturing schedules, and synchronizing product launches that maximized market impact while minimizing direct competition between the two corporations. Elena paused to prepare fresh tea as the natural light continued its gentle transition toward evening, the warming kettle providing a quiet counterpoint to the archive's steady, mechanical whisper. When she returned to her investigation, she discovered evidence that this collaboration extended to shared investment in research facilities, coordinated patent applications, and synchronized training programs that had created a unified technical culture across both corporations. The financial architecture revealed not corporate malfeasance, but rather a sophisticated understanding of how cooperative competition could serve both business interests and broader social goals. In a folder of miscellaneous reimbursements, Elena found expense claims that revealed the human elements underlying these financial structures. A RobCo travel advancement for a liaison engineer coincided with Vault-Tec training receipts for cross-facility orientation, automation support modules, both anchored by Prometheus reservations at conference facilities, with names like Hawthorne Rooms, suggesting regular face-to-face coordination between technical teams. The logistics schedules mapped alternating weeks of shared seminars, with Prometheus providing identical coffee service for each session, Elena blends, medium roast, 2 urns, 6 carafes, a detail that made Elena smile at how even small courtesies had been systematized within the larger framework of collaboration. At the bottom of one folder, she discovered a joint letter of engagement between Prometheus and both corporations, bearing 2 signatures that would prove significant for her continued investigation. The RobCo signatory was J. Moreno, Chief Systems Integration, while the Vault-Tec representative was S. Chen, Director, Human Systems Ethics. Elena noted the second title with particular interest. Someone had been ensuring that the technological collaboration maintained focus on human welfare rather than purely technical achievement, a role that suggested ethical frameworks had been built into the collaborative structure from its inception. As evening settled over the archive and the preservation lamps assumed their primary role in illuminating her workspace, Elena reflected on the financial harmonies she had uncovered. The apparent conspiracy between RobCo and Vault-Tec had revealed itself as something far more sophisticated, a carefully orchestrated partnership that had used the cover of public rivalry to pursue collaborative innovation that served both competitive interests and social good. The financial records showed not deception, but rather an unprecedented experiment in corporate cooperation that had prioritized technological advancement and human welfare over traditional competitive advantage. Elena secured the financial documents with careful attention to their preservation requirements and drew the personnel records cart into her circle of amber light. The money had revealed its patterns, showing how resources had flowed to support collaboration rather than competition. Now she needed to understand the individuals who had created and maintained these remarkable relationships. The engineers, managers, and strategic thinkers, like J. Moreno and S. Chen, who had built bridges across corporate boundaries in service of innovations that would benefit entire communities. The gentle hum of the archive's climate control systems provided steady accompaniment as Elena prepared to follow the human threads that would complete her understanding of how apparent competitors had created lasting frameworks for mutual benefit. Their patient, mechanical breathing, a reminder that the most important discoveries emerged through careful attention to details that connected past wisdom with present understanding. The personnel records cart rolled forward with the whispered precision of well-maintained wheels, settling into Elena's circle of amber light as evening deepened over the archive. She adjusted the preservation lamps to accommodate the different paper stock of employment files, their honey-colored glow revealing documents that would transform the financial and technical patterns she had discovered into human stories of professional dedication and collaborative vision. The folders carried the substantial weight of individual careers, shaped by purposes that transcended conventional corporate boundaries. Each file a window into lives that had been guided by shared commitments to innovation and human welfare. Elena began with the folder marked Moreno J, the same signature she had discovered on the Prometheus engagement letter. Jonathan Moreno's career progression unfolded with the systematic clarity of someone who had understood that the future required cooperation rather than competition. His early years at RobCo showed rapid advancement in automation design, with particular expertise in human-machine interface optimization. But Elena discovered a pivotal shift in his trajectory: a 6-month sabbatical in 2076, officially documented as Advanced Systems Study, but cross-referenced in careful handwriting to Inter-Corporate Liaison Training. When Moreno returned to RobCo, his projects had taken on an entirely different character. Elena found design schematics for robotic maintenance systems that included atmospheric pressure tolerances and air filtration requirements that precisely matched Vault-Tec's environmental specifications. The documentation revealed automation protocols designed not just for efficiency, but for seamless integration with living spaces where human comfort remained the primary consideration. Moreno's post-training work suggested he had returned with intimate understanding of how machines could serve human communities without imposing technological constraints on daily life. Elena reached for the corresponding Vault-Tec file marked Chen S and discovered the complementary half of this professional partnership. Sarah Chen's background revealed expertise in human factors, engineering, and environmental psychology, with early projects focused on creating interior spaces that promoted well-being in enclosed environments. Like Moreno, Chen had taken a similar sabbatical in 2076, returning to assume the role of Director, Human Systems Ethics, a position that seemed designed to ensure that technological collaboration maintained focus on human dignity rather than purely technical achievement. Chen's post-sabbatical projects showed remarkable integration with RobCo capabilities. Elena found architectural specifications for vault living areas that included precise conduit pathways for automated systems, but designed so that robotic presence enhanced rather than intruded upon human spaces. The documentation revealed careful attention to psychological factors, with automation systems that responded to human preferences and adapted to community needs, rather than requiring communities to adapt to technological imperatives. The pattern of professional migration extended throughout both organizations with elegant precision. Elena discovered evidence of sophisticated exchange programs that had operated beneath the surface of corporate competition, allowing key engineers and project managers to carry specialized knowledge across boundaries that should have remained impermeable. These transfers were documented not as job changes, but as collaborative fellowships and cross-training assignments that preserved employment continuity while enabling unprecedented knowledge sharing. Elena traced the career path of Marisol Kwan, a RobCo mechatronics specialist whose expense reports revealed regular consultation work at Vault-Tec facilities. Kwan's project notes, written in neat handwriting with small sketches in the margins, described door actuators that behaved as predicted when integrated with Vault-Tec environmental controls. Her counterpart, Darius Holt from Vault-Tec Environmental Systems, had logged corresponding visits to RobCo fabrication facilities, noting how robotic armatures compatible with airflow node tolerances created seamless integration between corporate technologies. The personnel files revealed a community of technical professionals who saw their work as contributing to something larger than corporate success. Elena found evidence of joint training programs documented as industry standardization workshops, but actually designed to create unified technical culture across both corporations. Training rosters showed courses in cross-platform integration and collaborative problem-solving methodologies, where RobCo and Vault-Tec engineers had studied together, developing shared expertise and common approaches to complex challenges. Elena discovered documentation of regular coordination conferences hosted by Prometheus Strategic Solutions, gatherings that served as forums for collaborative planning and innovation. Meeting agendas revealed sessions titled People, Then Systems, Designing Support Before Control, and Auditing for Trust, Why Transparency Outlasts Policy. The presentations were co-authored by engineers from both corporations, addressing challenges that required expertise from automation specialists and environmental designers working in concert. What struck Elena most profoundly was evidence that these professional relationships had been guided by shared philosophical frameworks that prioritized long-term functionality over short-term competitive advantage. Performance reviews revealed supervisors who valued unusual empathy for operators' lived experience, and engineers who were trusted by field teams to adapt without fuss. The language suggested a technical culture that had elevated human consideration to the same level as engineering precision. Elena found correspondence between these bridge-building professionals that revealed ongoing discussions about the ethical implications of integrated technologies. Letters addressed questions of consent, transparency, and human agency with the same careful attention they brought to technical specifications. One memo concluded with a handwritten postscript: "Send our best to the field team. Quiet nights to all." A blessing that captured how work and care had braided together in routine professional communication. The personnel records also revealed evidence of coordinated professional development that had created networks of mutual respect transcending corporate rivalry. Elena discovered travel claims for joint retreats at conference centers, with agendas that balanced technical sessions with philosophical discussions about the responsibilities of engineers toward future generations. These gatherings had fostered personal relationships that enabled the unprecedented cooperation documented in financial and technical records. As Elena prepared her notes for the next phase of investigation, she reflected on how individual expertise and professional relationships had created cooperation even within competitive corporate structures. The bridge builders, like Moreno, Chen, Kwan, and Holt, had understood that the challenges facing human communities required collaboration that transcended traditional boundaries. They had created informal networks of shared purpose that served both business interests and social good, developing technologies that enhanced human capabilities while preserving autonomy and judgy choice. The gentle hum of the archive's climate control systems provided steady accompaniment as Elena arranged the philosophical and ethical frameworks documentation that would complete her understanding of this remarkable collaboration. The personnel records had revealed the human elements that made cooperation possible. Engineers, managers, and strategic thinkers who had built bridges across corporate boundaries in service of innovations that would benefit entire communities. Now she needed to understand the intellectual foundations that had guided their work, tracing the philosophical threads that had transformed competitive corporations into collaborative partners committed to human welfare and technological stewardship. Elena secured the personnel files with careful attention to preservation requirements and drew a slim binder toward her workspace. Its cover bore a single word in understated typography: principles. The next phase would reveal not just what these remarkable professionals had accomplished, but why they had chosen to pursue cooperation over competition, their shared commitment to values that had made unprecedented collaboration not just possible, but inevitable. The slim binder marked principles settled into Elena's hands with the deceptive lightness of documents that carried profound weight, its understated typography reflecting the measured deliberation of minds that had grappled with questions extending far beyond quarterly earnings or competitive advantage. As evening deepened over the archive, the preservation lamps assumed their primary role in illuminating pages that would reveal the intellectual foundations underlying the remarkable collaboration she had been tracing through technical specifications and personnel records. The gentle hum of climate control systems provided steady accompaniment as Elena opened the binder to discover that both RobCo and Vault-Tec had maintained something almost unprecedented in corporate America. Dedicated teams of philosophers, ethicists, and social scientists whose explicit mandate was developing frameworks for long-term human welfare in an increasingly uncertain world. The first document Elena encountered was a comprehensive position paper titled Technological Stewardship in an Age of Acceleration, co-authored by Dr. Margaret Holloway from RobCo's Strategic Ethics Division and Dr. Samuel Reeves from Vault-Tec's Institute for Applied Philosophy. The report opened with a question that captured the intellectual seriousness both corporations had brought to their technological development. What responsibilities do creators of enduring technologies bear toward communities that will depend on those systems across generations? The authors explored this challenge through careful analysis of how technological choices made in moments of crisis could shape human development for decades or centuries, arguing that corporations with the capability to create lasting systems had corresponding obligations to ensure those systems served human flourishing rather than merely corporate interests. Elena traced the philosophical framework that had emerged from these deliberations, finding evidence of extensive discussions about what Dr. Holloway termed compatible innovation, technological development that prioritized integration and mutual enhancement over disruptive competition. Rather than viewing technology as a towering pillar that dominated its environment, the philosophers had developed metaphors of growth and support, technology as trellis, built for things that grow slowly, leaning, entwining, adapting to the communities they served. This vision had directly influenced the technical decisions Elena had discovered in earlier documents, explaining why SPARROW protocols emphasized permeable boundaries and glass wall separation that allowed observation without the power to overwrite human judgment. The documents revealed that Dr. Reeves had contributed complementary analysis focused on what he called graduated adaptation. The principle that technological change should occur at human-compatible speeds that allowed communities to maintain cultural continuity while incorporating beneficial innovations. His research had shown that abrupt technological transitions often created social disruption that negated the benefits of innovation, while gradual integration allowed communities to adapt systems to their specific needs and values. Elena found evidence that this philosophy had shaped everything from vault interior design to robotic interface protocols, creating systems that enhanced human capabilities without imposing technological constraints on daily life. As Elena moved deeper into the philosophical documents, she discovered that the SPARROW protocols she had examined earlier were revealed as implementations of ethical principles about information sharing, consent, and transparency. A detailed analysis titled Information Stewardship in Connected Communities outlined the moral framework underlying SPARROW's technical architecture. The protocol's emphasis on dual-key authentication reflected philosophical commitments to mutual consent, while comprehensive audit trails embodied principles of accountability and transparency that served all participants, rather than creating advantages for some at the expense of others. Elena paused to examine a fascinating section of meeting minutes from joint philosophical symposiums where thinkers from both corporations had engaged in sustained dialogue about the ethical implications of their technological choices. The transcripts revealed discussions that ranged from practical questions about consent mechanisms to broader considerations of how automated systems could preserve human dignity and agency. One particularly striking exchange addressed whether corporations had obligations to design systems that could function independently of their creators, ensuring that human communities would not become dependent on corporate survival for access to essential technologies. The philosophical frameworks had also addressed questions of intergenerational responsibility with remarkable prescience. Elena found extensive analysis exploring how technological choices made by one generation would affect the capabilities and options available to their descendants. The documents showed how collaborative approaches could create more resilient and adaptable systems that would serve human communities across changing circumstances, rather than locking future generations into technological paths that might prove unsuitable for their evolving needs. What struck Elena most profoundly was how these philosophical discussions had resolved the apparent tension between corporate competition and social responsibility. The thinkers had developed what they called collaborative competition, approaches that maintained market differentiation while sharing essential capabilities that benefited entire societies. They understood that public rivalry was a necessary component of the pre-war economic landscape, driving innovation and attracting investment. Yet they had created intellectual space where competing forces could be reconciled through shared commitment to human welfare. Elena discovered evidence of how these abstract principles had been translated into concrete design decisions. Dr. Sarah Chen's handwritten notes appeared throughout the documents, connecting philosophical frameworks to practical implementations. Next to a discussion of consent mechanisms, Chen had written, "Make the covenant visible to operators," while Jonathan Moreno had added, "Trust accrues in small, comprehensible steps," annotations that revealed how ethical principles had shaped the user experience of collaborative technologies. The philosophical documents also revealed careful attention to what the authors called anticipatory ethics, frameworks for making responsible decisions about technologies whose full implications could not be completely understood at the time of their creation. Both corporations had developed decision-making processes that emphasized reversibility, transparency, and ongoing consent. ensuring that communities would retain the ability to modify or discontinue technological systems as their understanding and needs evolved. As Elena prepared to transition to the next phase of her investigation, she reflected on how the philosophical documents had revealed the intellectual foundations that made unprecedented corporate cooperation not just possible, but inevitable. The thinkers employed by both corporations had understood that the challenges facing human communities required collaboration that transcended traditional competitive boundaries, developing ethical frameworks that transformed business relationships into partnerships for human welfare. The gentle hum of the archive's climate control systems provided steady accompaniment as Elena arranged the policy implementation documents that would show how these philosophical principles had been translated into practical procedures. The intellectual foundations had been established through careful thought and sustained dialogue between corporations that understood their responsibilities toward future generations. Now she needed to understand how these abstract principles had been transformed into concrete policies and operational procedures. The reciprocity, schedules, and governance frameworks that the philosophical documents had referenced but not yet fully explained. Elena secured the philosophical documents with careful attention to preservation requirements and drew a thick folder toward her workspace. Its cover bore the practical designation Implementation Protocols, suggesting that the next phase would reveal how lofty ideals had been transformed into working systems that served both corporate interests and human communities. The transition from philosophy to practice would complete another layer of her understanding of how apparent competitors had created lasting frameworks for mutual benefit. Their collaboration guided by shared commitments to values that elevated human welfare above traditional business considerations. The thick folder marked Implementation Protocols, opened beneath Elena's magnification system with the soft resistance of well-made hinges, its pages releasing the faint scent of preservation chemicals, an aged ink that had become as familiar to her as the archive's gentle mechanical breathing. As evening deepened over the restored basement, the preservation lamps assumed their primary role in illuminating documents that would reveal how the philosophical frameworks she had discovered were translated into the practical governance structures that made unprecedented corporate cooperation not just possible, but systematically sustainable. Elena adjusted her position and reached for her lukewarm tea, moving it to a safer corner of her workspace before settling into the methodical rhythm that had guided her investigation through technical specifications, financial harmonies, and human relationships. The first document Elena encountered was a comprehensive scheduling matrix titled Reciprocity Schedules, Structured Cooperation Framework, bearing joint signatures from senior executives of both corporations and dated February 1977. The pages revealed an elegant lattice of time blocks and carefully annotated exchanges that operated like a calendar that was not quite a calendar, a ledger that was not quite accounting. Elena traced the systematic architecture through detailed flowcharts that showed how resources, information, and expertise flowed between RobCo and Vault-Tec, according to carefully calibrated timing that preserved competitive balance while enabling unprecedented collaboration. The schedule for Quarter 2, 2077 began with remarkable precision. Every fortnight, a Sparrow session window opened for exactly 90 minutes, with RobCo serving as observer for Vault-Tec's atmospheric adaptation trials. On alternating weeks, Vault-Tec held a corresponding window into RobCo's actuator durability data. Under each entry, Elena found brief ethicist's notes written in careful handwriting, audit tape spooling verified, consent confirmations logged, window closed without alteration. The symmetry pleased her. periods of attention given and received in equal measure, creating a rhythm that made observation part of shared work rather than surveillance. Elena discovered that reciprocity was implemented through three primary mechanisms, described with remarkable precision throughout the policy documents. Technology transfers occurred through synchronized innovation releases, where both corporations shared complementary advances on coordinated schedules that maximized market impact while ensuring neither party gained unfair competitive advantage. Research initiatives were coordinated through parallel development protocols that allowed both companies to pursue related projects simultaneously, sharing foundational knowledge while maintaining proprietary approaches to implementation. Infrastructure projects were managed through distributed investment frameworks that spread costs and risks across both organizations while creating shared capabilities that enhanced both parties' technological foundations. The governance section lay folded beneath a ribbon, its paper thicker and margins more generous, carrying the tone of a constitution composed by engineers who understood people. Elena found detailed descriptions of a rotating steward model that replaced the idea of permanent arbiters. Each quarter, a different pair of stewards, one from RobCo and one from Vault-Tec, guided the cadence of exchanges. No steward could serve twice in a year. Decisions required concurrence, not capitulation. In the event of disagreement, what the documents called the no surprise rule applied. Any contested change would be published to both sides in advance of discussion, with plain language rationale attached, and a cooling period observed before any vote. Elena traced her finger along a clause titled "The Clear Wall," which codified what she had observed in SPARROW's glass wall metaphor. Data could be looked at, learned from, and then left where it belonged. The protocol insisted on narrative records appended to each exchange, a few lines where the accessing team stated not only what they sought, but why. Reading the sample entries attached, Elena found a repeated cadence that felt almost liturgical. Today, we observed the failure mode. We will adjust our fixture design, not your airflow. Thank you for the window. The humility of these notes suggested that governance, in practice, had been as much about tone as about rules. As Elena moved deeper into the policy documents, she discovered evidence of how these reciprocity schedules had evolved over time, becoming more sophisticated and comprehensive as both corporations gained experience in collaborative innovation. Early documents from 2075 showed relatively simple exchanges, RobCo sharing automation protocols in return for Vault-Tec environmental data. But by 2077, the schedules had developed into comprehensive frameworks that coordinated everything from manufacturing schedules to personnel development programs. One particularly revealing example was a shared infrastructure development agreement that outlined the co-funding and co-management of a specialized testing facility in Quincy, funded by RobCo, maintained by Vault-Tec, with choreographed occupancy schedules, morning blocks for environmental trials, afternoon blocks for robotic gate adaptation. Elena found herself particularly drawn to a section outlining what the documents called asymmetric reciprocity, recognition that meaningful collaboration did not require identical contributions from each party, but rather complementary exchanges that leveraged each corporation's unique strengths. The shared costs were balanced with gentle arithmetic that counted electricity, offset as contribution, travel reductions as contribution, and mentoring as contribution too, its value agreed upon in advance by both stewards. In the margins, a small asterisk pointed to an annotation she recognized as Sarah Chen's handwriting. Recognize teaching as labor. Recognize listening as labor. The policy documents also revealed sophisticated attention to preserving each corporation's public market identity, while enabling unprecedented behind-the-scenes cooperation. Elena discovered competitive theater protocols that maintained public rivalry through carefully orchestrated marketing campaigns and product differentiation strategies, while actual technological development proceeded through collaborative channels that served broader social goals. This approach allowed both corporations to maintain investor confidence and market position while pursuing innovations that transcended traditional competitive boundaries. Elena paused to examine a fascinating section addressing the governance of unexpected situations. A slender portion marked rainy day reciprocity detailed how each corporation would hold reserves of goodwill, defined in hours, not dollars, to be used when sudden needs arose. If one team encountered a late-stage fault, the other would lend diagnostic time and expertise, drawing down against its reserve. The reserve could be refilled not only with more hours later, but with documentation improvements, test fixtures redesigned for shared use, and minor patents refiled as co-owned when their purpose was clearly integrative. As Elena prepared her notes for the next phase of investigation, she reflected on how organizational policies could create sustainable cooperation between competitive entities without compromising their individual capabilities or market positions. The reciprocity schedules represented a remarkable achievement in institutional design, creating frameworks that transformed zero-sum competitive dynamics into positive-sum collaborative relationships that served both business interests and social welfare. The mechanisms were simple but generous, designed less to win arguments than to keep conversations human and productive. The gentle hum of the archive's climate control systems provided steady accompaniment as Elena arranged the project implementation documents that would show how these sophisticated policies had been translated into actual collaborative initiatives. She discovered a thin divider tucked behind the governance section, as if placed there to catch the hand that had learned to turn pages slowly. A small label, typed and then underlined, once in pencil, read, "Convergence Implementation Portfolios." The sheets beyond it were thicker, interleaved with transparent overlays, where systems stacked upon systems with the clarity of an atlas. Elena secured the policy documents with careful attention to preservation requirements and drew the project portfolio toward her workspace. The transition from policy to practice would reveal how abstract governance structures had enabled concrete collaborative achievements, showing how two competing corporations had created technologies that served human communities more effectively than either could have developed independently. As she prepared to examine the actual implementation of Project Convergence, Elena felt the satisfaction of an investigator who had moved systematically from surface observations through technical specifications, financial architectures, human relationships, and philosophical frameworks to arrive at the practical mechanisms that had made unprecedented cooperation not just possible, but inevitable. The next phase would complete her understanding of how reciprocity schedules and gentle governance had transformed competitive relationships into partnerships for human welfare. Their collaboration, guided by shared commitments to technological stewardship that transcended traditional business considerations. The project portfolio marked Convergence Implementation Portfolios, settled into Elena's hands with the substantial weight of ambition made manifest. Its transparent overlays creating layers of meaning, as systems nested within systems with the methodical precision that had characterized all her discoveries. As evening deepened over the archive, the preservation lamps revealed comprehensive documentation that transformed the philosophical frameworks and governance structures she had been tracing into concrete plans for integrated human communities. The gentle hum of climate control systems provided steady accompaniment as Elena positioned the materials beneath her magnification system, preparing to examine what the cover page identified as Project Convergence Integrated Community Systems Initiative, a joint undertaking that represented the culmination of everything she had discovered about RobCo Vault-Tec collaboration. Elena began with the executive summary, a document that opened with remarkable clarity of purpose. Project Convergence seeks to create fully integrated underground communities where RobCo automation expertise and Vault-Tec environmental management systems function as unified support infrastructure, enabling self-sustaining habitats that preserve human agency while providing comprehensive life support across extended operational periods. The language was precise but not cold, technical but not alienating, suggesting authors who understood that the most sophisticated technologies should feel natural rather than imposing to the communities they served. This was not corporate takeover by either party, but genuine synthesis that preserved each corporation's strengths while creating something entirely new. The technical specifications that followed revealed unprecedented attention to human factors at every level of system integration. Elena discovered automation protocols designed not to replace human decision-making, but to support community choices through what the documentation described as adaptive assistance frameworks. Instead of predetermined responses to environmental conditions, the systems were designed to learn community preferences and adapt their operations accordingly. A detailed schematic showed how a corridor light would warm in hue as footsteps approached, asking permission with a soft chime before brightening. Kitchen surfaces would shift from cooking mode to gathering mode when multiple hands rested on them, while maintenance robots wrapped in sound-dampening sleeves would note problems and send quiet messages to human operators rather than proceeding with automatic repairs. Elena traced the integration philosophy through architectural drawings that showed how every automated system included manual overrides positioned at eye level, visible, reachable, unambiguous. The documentation revealed what the engineers called graceful degradation protocols, ensuring that communities would retain essential capabilities even if sophisticated automation became unavailable. If the central hub failed, the habitat would not fall silent, but step into simpler modes. Vents holding their last comfortable settings, doors returning to manual operation, task boards lighting with paper-based routines that trained stewards could follow with pencil and watch. The approach reflected the philosophical commitment to human agency that Elena had discovered throughout her investigation. As Elena examined the environmental management specifications, she found evidence of remarkable integration between atmospheric controls, water recycling, food production, and waste management systems designed as unified ecological infrastructure. Vault-Tec's environmental plans showed airflow skirting room edges to minimize drafts, temperature bands narrowing at night to invite sleep, horticulture modules delivering subtle plant scents on community days. The systems incorporated what the documentation called community rhythm adaptation, where lighting, temperature, and air circulation patterns would adjust to support the natural social rhythms that emerged within each habitat, rather than imposing predetermined schedules. Elena discovered that Project Convergence had incorporated extensive feedback from the social scientists and ethicists whose work she had previously encountered. Design reviews included detailed reports from Dr. Sarah Chen's Human Systems Ethics team, analyzing how integrated technologies could preserve human dignity and community autonomy while providing necessary support systems. These reports had directly influenced design decisions, creating what one engineer had described as invisible support. Systems sophisticated enough to anticipate needs without requiring constant human attention or creating technological dependence. The governance section revealed elegant frameworks that distributed authority across community members while providing technological tools that supported collective decision-making. Elena found detailed descriptions of the Steward's Circle, a rotating council of trained residents who could convene and adjust settings in response to lived conditions. No steward could serve twice in a year, and decisions required concurrence rather than capitulation. The documentation included consent cascade protocols, requiring explicit community approval for any significant system changes, with automation that could suggest optimizations but never implement them without human authorization. Elena paused to examine specific implementation examples that brought the abstract principles into human focus. The food production systems, while entirely automated, included interfaces allowing residents to customize nutrient profiles, request specific textures, and suggest new flavor combinations. In the margins, someone had written, "Mint should be a choice," with another hand adding, "and basil," annotations that revealed how community preferences shaped technological capabilities. A proposal to add behavioral nudging in dietary settings had been firmly crossed out, with Sarah Chen's neat handwriting beside it. "No, we do not nudge. We invite." The project files revealed careful attention to what the documentation called community nexus protocols, designated common areas where automated services were deliberately minimized to encourage direct human interaction. Even robotic service units were programmed with social distance parameters, ensuring they navigated shared spaces with respectful awareness of human presence, pausing or rerouting to avoid intrusion. The Sparrow protocols appeared throughout the documentation, creating transparent channels for system monitoring that preserved community oversight of all automated functions. Elena discovered that convergence had been designed to support diverse community structures rather than imposing standardized approaches to underground living. The systems included extensive customization capabilities, allowing communities to adapt technological support to their specific needs and values, creating what the documentation described as technological pluralism. Hydroponic arrays would hum beneath trellis lighting, tuned to sunrise spectrums, with nutrient recipes displayed on communal terminals, where residents could propose adjustments based on taste and tradition. As Elena moved deeper into the project documentation, she found evidence of how the philosophical frameworks she had discovered earlier had been translated into practical design decisions. The emphasis on transparency appeared in comprehensive system documentation, available to all residents, while principles of consent were implemented through community assemblies, with posted agendas and the right to revert settings by vote. The commitment to human stewardship was visible in provisions for community-controlled system evolution, allowing habitats to modify their technological infrastructure as needs changed over time. The technical architecture revealed sophisticated balance between automation and human control through modular designs that could be upgraded, reconfigured, or simplified based on community decisions. Elena found extensive provisions for what the engineers called failure-safe design, redundant systems and manual overrides that preserved essential capabilities regardless of technological failures. The approach ensured that technological choices made during initial construction would not constrain future generations' options, embodying the intergenerational responsibility that had guided the collaborative philosophy. Near the end of the portfolio, Elena discovered a section addressing external conditions with understated realism. Convergence assumed nothing of the world above, promising instead that the world below would not forget itself. There were provisions for exchanging music, and stories as much as parts and schedules, with supply runs planned in neighborly terms rather than scarcity language. A page documented a pilot program where residents recorded their routines as advice for future communities, the modest wisdom of people who had watered plants at dawn and found it worked. As Elena prepared her notes for the next phase of investigation, she reflected on how Project Convergence represented not just technological achievement, but fundamental reimagining of the relationship between human communities and their technological infrastructure. The project had created frameworks for technology that served human flourishing while preserving the autonomy and dignity that made communities resilient across changing circumstances. The gentle hum of the archive's climate control systems provided steady accompaniment as Elena arranged materials that would complete her understanding of this remarkable collaboration. She discovered a slim folder tucked behind the technical specifications, its cover bearing a handwritten label in familiar script. Internal advocacy, guardian protocols. A faint pencil mark on the margin of a communication flowchart had caught her attention, next to a barely legible note. But what if they don't want to be supported? The question suggested that even within this carefully designed framework of cooperation, human voices had emerged to ensure that collaborative technologies truly served human communities, rather than merely demonstrating technical capabilities. Elena secured the project documentation with careful attention to preservation requirements and drew the advocacy folder toward her workspace. The transition from technical specifications to internal guardianship would reveal how individuals within both corporations had worked to protect the collaborative vision from pressures that might compromise its commitment to human welfare. Their efforts creating accountability mechanisms that aligned business innovation with social values, even when expedient alternatives presented themselves. The slim folder marked Internal Advocacy, Guardian Protocols settled into Elena's hands with the quiet weight of documents that had been consulted often, its margins bearing the small annotations and thoughtful corrections that suggested careful repeated consideration. As evening deepened over the archive, the preservation lamps revealed a penciled question in familiar handwriting near the folder's edge. But what if they don't want to be supported? The query seemed less a challenge than a reminder that even the most benevolent technological assistance required permission before becoming presumption. Elena opened the folder to discover correspondence and memoranda that transformed the technical achievements of Project Convergence into a more complex story of human advocacy working within corporate structures to ensure that collaborative innovation served genuine human welfare, rather than merely demonstrating engineering capability. The first document bore an understated title, Guardian Protocols, Internal Advocacy and Ethical Review, followed by a roster of names from both corporations, arranged not by hierarchy, but by participation, their alternating affiliations creating a pattern of shared responsibility across corporate boundaries. Dr. Sarah Chen appeared first, her role as Director of Human Systems Ethics at Vault-Tec, now revealed in fuller context through internal memoranda that showed her persistent, gentle influence on Project Convergence development. A memo dated March 15th, 2077, addressed the steering committee with characteristic directness. We have successfully created systems that can anticipate human needs with remarkable precision. We must now ensure that communities retain meaningful authority to decline our assistance when they judge it inappropriate to their circumstances. Elena recognized the philosophical framework she had discovered earlier, but here it appeared as practical advocacy within active engineering projects. Elena discovered that Chen had worked closely with her RobCo counterpart, Dr. Marcus Webb, whose role in civic systems integrity provided parallel ethical oversight for automation development. Their correspondence revealed ongoing collaboration across corporate boundaries, with Webb's March 18th memo addressing the same concerns from the automation perspective. Our systems excel at learning community preferences and adapting accordingly. However, we must distinguish between adaptation that serves human choice and adaptation that subtly shapes human behavior toward technological convenience. The documents revealed systematic ethical review processes integrated into all collaborative development projects. Elena found a comprehensive protocol document outlining Guardian review stages that required explicit ethical assessment at each phase of system design, with particular attention to questions of consent, transparency, and community autonomy. The reviews included not only engineers and project managers, but also social scientists, ethicists, and community liaisons whose role was representing the perspectives of people who would actually live with the technologies being developed. Elena paused to examine what the Guardians called the clear wall test, 15 questions written in accessible language that every project had to answer before advancing. Where is the boundary? Who can see through it? Who must be notified when observation occurs? What would it mean to step through? Can we step back? Each question was paired with practical implementation requirements: dual key authentication, immutable audit trails, community notice systems using plain language rather than technical jargon. The test transformed abstract ethical principles into concrete design requirements that preserved human agency within automated environments. The ethical guardian's influence on SPARROW protocols became clear through detailed technical reviews that had identified potential privacy concerns in early implementations. Chen's team had insisted on consent granularity, mechanisms allowing communities to approve specific types of data sharing while declining others. The final Sparrow protocols included what the documentation called window etiquette, procedures that felt almost neighborly in their specificity. Announce the window, state your purpose in one sentence. Proceed only after acknowledgement. Leave things as you found them. Thank the hosts. Elena discovered extensive documentation of practical advocacy that had shaped specific design decisions throughout Project Convergence. When early proposals for automated meal preparation prioritized efficiency over human preference, Chen's team had successfully argued for modular cooking stations that allowed residents to participate in food preparation as social activity rather than mere necessity. Similarly, Webb's group had pushed for human-supervised automation in maintenance systems, ensuring that even routine repairs included community notification and consent protocols. The internal memos revealed ongoing discussions about balancing technological capability with human autonomy. Elena found a particularly thoughtful exchange, addressing whether automated systems should become more efficient over time through machine learning, or whether such adaptation represented technological evolution that communities should explicitly control. Their conclusion, reflected in Project Convergence specifications, was that all adaptive capabilities should include community oversight mechanisms, allowing residents to review and approve system modifications before implementation. Elena traced how ethical advocacy had required persistent effort within corporate structures that naturally prioritize technical achievement and efficiency metrics. Meeting minutes showed regular sessions where Chen, Webb, and their colleagues worked to ensure that ethical considerations received equal weight, with engineering specifications in project decisions. The discussions balanced technical possibilities with human values, often resulting in design choices that were more complex to implement but better served community needs. The Guardians had addressed questions of technological dependence with remarkable foresight. Elena found extensive analysis of how communities might maintain essential capabilities if sophisticated automation became unavailable, leading to the graceful degradation protocols she had discovered in Project Convergence documentation. These provisions ensured that human communities would retain knowledge and tools necessary to manage their environment manually, preventing technological dependence that could compromise community resilience. As Elena examined the final documents in the advocacy folder, she found evidence that ethical guardianship had continued through the final months before the Great War. A memorandum from Chen, dated October 20th, 2077, just 3 days before the bombs fell, addressed last-minute concerns about emergency protocols. In crisis conditions, automated systems may recommend responses that prioritize physical survival over community autonomy. We must ensure that even emergency protocols preserve meaningful human choice about how communities respond to extraordinary circumstances. The documentation revealed how internal advocacy had created accountability mechanisms that aligned business innovation with social values through the persistent efforts of individuals who understood that technological capability alone was insufficient to serve human welfare. The ethical guardians had transformed Project Convergence from a technical achievement into a comprehensive framework for human flourishing that preserved dignity, autonomy, and choice, even within highly automated environments. Elena reflected on how the Guardians had embedded what one memo called institutional conscience into corporate decision-making processes, creating systems where ethical considerations were not afterthoughts, but integral components of technological development. Their work had ensured that the remarkable collaboration between RobCo and Vault-Tec remained accountable to the human communities it was designed to serve. The gentle hum of the archive's climate control systems provided steady accompaniment as Elena secured the advocacy documents and arranged materials for the next phase of her investigation. She discovered a folder marked Field Implementation, Community Feedback Protocols, that would reveal how these carefully developed ethical frameworks had been tested and refined through practical experience with communities that had participated in validating collaborative technologies. The transition from internal advocacy to practical testing would show how theoretical commitments to human welfare had been validated through direct community engagement, completing her understanding of how unprecedented corporate cooperation had created systems that truly served human communities, rather than merely demonstrating technological capability. The folder marked Field Implementation Community Feedback Protocols settled into Elena's hands with the substantial weight of documents that had been consulted frequently, their margins bearing the small annotations and thoughtful corrections that suggested ongoing refinement through practical experience. As evening deepened over the archive, the preservation lamps revealed pages that would transform the ethical frameworks and technical specifications she had been tracing into stories of actual human communities who had helped shape the collaborative technologies through patient dialogue and careful attention to lived experience. The gentle hum of climate control systems provided steady accompaniment as Elena prepared to examine what the cover page identified as pilot community documentation, voluntary testing, and system refinement. Elena began with an introductory document that immediately distinguished these testing programs from the harsh experimental environments that some post-war accounts had suggested characterized pre-war corporate research. The opening paragraph stated with remarkable clarity, "All pilot community participation is voluntary, with comprehensive informed consent procedures, ongoing advocacy support, and explicit rights to modify or terminate participation at any stage, without penalty or question. Our goal is not to test human adaptation to technological systems, but rather to refine technological systems through careful attention to human needs, preferences, and community wisdom. The language reflected the philosophical frameworks Elena had discovered throughout her investigation, but here they appeared as operational principles guiding actual community engagement. The documentation revealed 3 pilot communities that had participated in testing integrated RobCo Vault-Tec systems throughout 2076 and early 2077. Elena found detailed consent forms that included what the Guardians called granular permission structures, comprehensive checklists allowing participants to approve specific aspects of technological integration while declining others. Each form bore small boxes that could be checked or left empty. Lighting adaptation, yes, no. Automated meal preparation, yes, no. Environmental soundscaping, yes, no. Data sharing windows, yes, no. Beside the grid, Elena recognized Sarah Chen's neat handwriting. Consent accrues in parts. Let people build their own agreement. The first pilot community, designated Hawthorne Residential Cooperative in Western Massachusetts, had volunteered to test automated support systems in exchange for reduced energy costs and enhanced security. Elena traced the evolution of their participation through monthly feedback reports that revealed remarkable attention to preserving existing social routines while incorporating beneficial technological assistance. Early installations had included lighting systems that responded to occupancy patterns, but community feedback had led to significant refinements based on how residents actually lived together. Elena discovered a particularly revealing example in the feedback from a resident identified only as Alvarez. On the first day of testing, Alvarez had written on a feedback card, "Please let the kitchen lights greet us, not anticipate us. We come in slow from the corridor." 2 days later, the technical logs recorded the response. Kitchen entry recognition revised from predictive to presence confirmed. Brightness ramp extended from 1.0 second to 3.0 seconds. Hue shift warmed by 2 Kelvin. The following morning's feedback card carried a simple note: "Better. We can feel our own arrival." The second pilot, Riverside Gardens Collective in Vermont, had focused on testing integrated environmental management systems. Elena found extensive documentation showing how atmospheric controls had been refined through continuous dialogue with residents about comfort preferences and the subtle environmental factors that contributed to community well-being. The initial configuration had used uniform ventilation, designed for efficiency, but resident feedback had revealed how constant background sound made it difficult to notice important changes. Water boiling, children waking, conversations beginning. The engineering team had responded by creating what they called acoustic landscapes that provided environmental stability while preserving the natural sound textures that helped communities feel connected to their spaces. Elena paused to examine what the documentation called comfort mapping, detailed records of how residents experienced different environmental configurations, with feedback collected through both formal surveys and informal conversations during daily activities. The maps revealed that effective environmental management required attention not just to objective measurements, like temperature and humidity, but also to subjective factors, like air movement patterns and the psychological effects of different lighting spectrums on community mood and social interaction. The third pilot community, Millbrook Underground Community in New Hampshire, had tested fully integrated systems in a purpose-built underground facility that served as a prototype for Project Convergence implementations. Elena discovered extensive records showing how this community had provided feedback on comprehensive integration that combined automation with environmental management in ways that supported, rather than replaced, human decision-making. Residents had worked with engineers to refine what the documentation called invitation protocols, systems that offered assistance rather than imposing it, asking permission before making changes, and always providing clear ways to decline or modify automated responses. Elena found evidence that all three pilot communities had been supported by comprehensive advocacy and psychological services throughout their participation. Each community had been assigned liaison teams that included not only technical specialists, but also social workers, psychologists, and ethicists, whose explicit role was ensuring that testing remained focused on community benefit rather than corporate convenience. The documentation showed regular check-ins, community meetings, and individual consultation sessions designed to identify and address any concerns about technological integration before they could become sources of stress or discomfort. The feedback integration process revealed sophisticated attention to translating community experiences into technical improvements through what the engineers called gentle refinement cycles. Elena discovered detailed protocols for collecting, analyzing, and implementing user feedback, with particular emphasis on distinguishing between individual preferences that could be accommodated through customization and community needs that required fundamental design changes. The approach treated residents as collaborative partners rather than test subjects, with their insights valued equally alongside technical performance data. Elena examined specific examples of how community feedback had shaped system implementations in ways that prioritized human experience over engineering convenience. When residents at Hawthorne reported that automated meal preparation systems diminished the social aspects of cooking that were important to community life, engineers had redesigned the systems to support collaborative food preparation. The final designs included modular cooking stations that could operate automatically when convenient, but also provided workspace and tools for residents who wanted to participate directly in meal preparation, treating cooking as social activity rather than mere necessity. Similarly, feedback from Riverside Gardens had led to significant improvements in environmental management interfaces. Early systems had required technical knowledge to adjust atmospheric settings, but community input had resulted in intuitive controls that used natural language and familiar metaphors. Instead of numerical temperature settings, residents could request morning garden warmth or evening reading comfort, with systems that learned to associate these descriptive preferences with specific environmental configurations that felt natural rather than imposed. The documentation revealed careful attention to the psychological aspects of technological integration, with regular community meetings where residents could discuss their experiences in supportive environments that prioritized human welfare over technical achievement. Elena found transcripts of these sessions, facilitated by trained counselors who understood both the potential benefits and risks of extensive automation, ensuring that community voices remained central to the refinement process rather than being filtered through corporate priorities. Elena discovered that the pilot communities had maintained ongoing relationships with the development teams throughout the testing period, with engineers and designers making regular visits to observe how systems functioned within actual community contexts. These visits had revealed subtle but important factors that laboratory testing could not capture: the importance of system sounds in creating feelings of safety rather than intrusion, the role of lighting patterns in supporting natural social rhythms, and the ways that automation interfaces could either enhance or diminish feelings of community competence and autonomy. The Sparrow protocols appeared throughout the testing documentation, but implemented with what the residents had termed neighborly etiquette. Data sharing windows were announced through wall terminals that displayed simple messages. Observation window open. RobCo analysts reviewing airflow patterns for 2 hours with your permission. When windows closed, thank you messages appeared alongside links to immutable logs that communities could review, treating transparency as courtesy rather than compliance requirement. As Elena prepared her notes for the next phase of investigation, she reflected on how the testing grounds had demonstrated that ethical technology development required ongoing dialogue between creators and users, with refinement processes that prioritized human experience over engineering efficiency. The pilot communities had served not as experimental subjects, but as collaborative partners in developing technologies that would genuinely enhance human community while preserving the autonomy and dignity that made communities resilient across changing circumstances. The gentle hum of the archive's climate control systems provided steady accompaniment as Elena secured the testing documents and arranged materials that would reveal how these refined systems had been prepared for broader implementation in the final months before the Great War. She discovered a folder marked Deployment Readiness, Manufacturing and Training Protocols that would complete her understanding of how careful testing and community feedback had shaped the collaborative technologies that would serve post-war communities throughout the Commonwealth. Their development guided by genuine commitment to human welfare rather than corporate achievement. The transition from testing to preparation would show how unprecedented cooperation had created not just technical solutions, but comprehensive frameworks for technological stewardship that honored both human needs and technological capabilities. The folder marked Deployment Readiness, Manufacturing and Training Protocols settled into Elena's hands with the substantial weight of documents that carried the quiet urgency of approaching completion, their pages bearing the careful annotations of engineers and coordinators who had understood they were preparing systems that would need to function reliably across circumstances they could not entirely predict. As evening deepened toward night over the archive, the preservation lamps revealed comprehensive documentation from the final months before the Great War, showing how RobCo and Vault-Tec had coordinated their efforts like instruments in a carefully orchestrated symphony, each corporation contributing its unique voice to a harmony that would serve human communities regardless of what external conditions might emerge. Elena began with manufacturing coordination documents that opened like a score marked for alternating instruments. RobCo fabrication nodes took lead on actuator assemblies, sensor spines, and the soft-footed chassis that would carry maintenance units through quiet corridors, while Vault-Tec regional workshops answered with environmental panels, airflow baffles, and the modular wall conduits that made manual overrides visible at eye level and operable with one steady hand. Each schedule carried synchronized release dates, with color-coded crates crossing maps in practiced patterns, blue for sealed electronics, ochre for environmental hardware, each bearing a small paper envelope affixed to the hinge with a wax seal impressed with a shared insignia, a tiny sparrow in flight over two interleaved circles. It was not a brand so much as a promise. The documentation revealed unprecedented integration of manufacturing processes that treated RobCo automation components and Vault-Tec environmental systems as unified infrastructure rather than separate products. Quality assurance protocols required testing of integrated assemblies rather than individual components, with acceptance criteria that evaluated how well RobCo actuators responded to Vault-Tec atmospheric sensors, and how effectively Vault-Tec air handlers supported RobCo maintenance robotics. Elena discovered that this coordination extended to the smallest details. Production memos included cross-authored addendums detailing precise torque settings, acoustic dampening requirements, and mounting specifications that ensured seamless integration at every stage of assembly. Installation protocols nested beside manufacturing, with reassuring symmetry, revealing careful coordination designed to minimize disruption while ensuring reliable integration of collaborative technologies. Teams were staggered like the schedules they served. Vault-Tec fitters in the morning, RobCo riggers in the afternoon, always leaving spaces quiet by evening so that new systems could be listened to before being asked to work. Elena traced a standard sequence through the documentation: uncrate, pre-check, set, level, fasten, breathe, listen. The pause was codified with gentle precision. Breathing interval. One foreman had written in pencil, 10 minutes by the clock. Listen for any new voice in the room. If a whir was too bright, if a draft felt unkind, adjustments were made then, not later, while the installer's ears were still tuned to the space. The training documentation revealed comprehensive preparation of human operators who would maintain and adapt collaborative systems after installation, balancing technical knowledge with the philosophical frameworks that had guided the collaboration from its inception. Elena found detailed curricula that emphasized what the documentation called stewardship principles, guidelines for maintaining technological systems in ways that served human communities, rather than merely preserving technical functionality. The steward's course unfolded over 6 weeks in measured steps. Week 1 involved mapping spaces and naming valves. Week 2 introduced shadow mode, where automation observed while humans led. Week 3 provided practice windows, where systems suggested and stewards responded with reasoned choices. Elena discovered training materials that were both precise and humane, including scenario cards the size of a hand that described situations in gentle, practical language. It is late. Lights seem cooler than you prefer for evening reading. 3 of you feel it, 1 does not. Practice finding the setting together. The point, repeated without admonition throughout the materials, was not just to control systems, but to keep communities in conversation with them. Cross-badged technicians wore small pins with both corporate insignias beneath the same sparrow seal, not to erase their affiliations, but to acknowledge their shared custody of the outcome. Contingency preparations ran like a steady undertone beneath the confident melody of production, revealing extensive planning for various scenarios that might disrupt normal operations. Elena found what the engineers called graceful independence protocols, procedures that allowed integrated systems to continue operating effectively, even if communication between components was disrupted. Power pathways braided into islandable segments, each with its own modest storage and hand-throw switches that could be moved by trained residents without fear of arc or shock. Air handling could step down through 3 modes labeled not only by numbers, but by plain words: everyday, storm, lamplight. Water systems paired automated valves with mechanical hand wheels whose paint was chosen as much for visibility as for kindness to the hand. Sparrow's place within final preparations was likewise doubled, including both live windows for ongoing communication. And what Elena discovered were read-only cabinets, thin servers packaged like reference books, each containing mirrors of the last agreed-upon configurations and the stories that explained how they had been reached. If you cannot ask us, you may still know what we did and why. A margin note read in Sarah Chen's familiar handwriting. The mirrored sets shipped with the hardware, wrapped in the same grey foam, each cabinet coming with a small sealing ribbon that showed when it had been opened, with instructions that were clear and modest. Open when you need to remember. Elena found evidence of final system testing that went far beyond typical corporate quality assurance, including what the engineers called community simulation protocols. These tests evaluated not just technical performance, but also how systems would feel to communities using them daily, measuring response times and energy efficiency, alongside assessments of user comfort, community satisfaction, and preservation of social routines. Quality assurance followed as companion rather than correction, with each component wearing a small green stamp once it had passed inspection, and the stamps themselves logged in ledgers that felt ceremonial in their simplicity. The deployment schedules revealed methodical preparation for rapid implementation throughout late 2077, with manufacturing capacity scaled to support widespread installation of collaborative systems. Elena discovered provisions for prioritizing communities with greatest need, emergency deployment protocols, and coordination mechanisms that would ensure equitable distribution of collaborative technologies. The planning reflected genuine commitment to serving human welfare rather than maximizing corporate profit, with extensive documentation designed to be accessible to communities without specialized technical knowledge. As Elena moved through the final documents, the dates drew closer to a horizon that made her pause with recognition of how closely all this careful readiness approached the known edge of history. October 20th, full corridor night walk, lights and air in harmony, signatures in green ink. October 21st, meal cycle with manual assist, station warmers hold temperature, kitchen quiet, observed and approved. October 22nd, Sparrow audit window, final. Etiquette messages posted and thanked. Immutable logs sealed. October 23rd, morning. Handover ritual for the Millbrook prototype. Steward's circle, seated. The central hub spoke to the room through the human voice of its operator. We are here to help. Tell us how. Elena found a handwritten note attached to a final system certification, dated October 22nd, 2077, just one day before the Great War, written in Sarah Chen's careful script. All Guardian protocols confirmed. Communities retain full autonomy. Systems will serve, not govern. May they find these tools useful. The message carried the weight of someone who understood that the work was complete, and that the collaborative technologies would now need to prove their worth through service to human communities across circumstances that could not be predicted or controlled. Between these final entries, Elena discovered last checks that were tender in their practicality, spare gaskets sorted in soft cloth rolls, listening stethoscopes hung by maintenance doors, paperback field guides placed in reading nooks, the kind of small kindnesses that make unfamiliar systems feel less like machines and more like neighbors. Quality assurance in the final week had opened into assurance of comprehension, where stewards read back procedures in their own words, with that act itself logged as passing grade. As Elena prepared her notes for the final phase of investigation, she reflected on how the careful preparation she had documented revealed the depth of commitment both corporations had brought to creating systems that would genuinely serve human communities across changing circumstances. The final preparations had transformed experimental cooperation into comprehensive infrastructure designed to preserve human welfare and community autonomy. Regardless of external conditions, their collaboration guided by shared understanding that technological resilience required human competence rather than technological complexity. The gentle hum of the archive's climate control systems provided steady accompaniment as Elena secured the deployment documents and arranged materials for her concluding investigation. she discovered a thin folder that would complete her understanding by showing how these carefully prepared collaborative technologies had actually served post-war communities throughout the Commonwealth, not through corporate metrics, but through the lived experience of people who had depended on them for survival and community building in the decades that followed. The transition from meticulous preparation to enduring legacy would reveal the true measure of what two competing corporations had accomplished when they chose cooperation over competition. Their shared vision, creating technologies that continued to serve human communities with the same patient dedication that had guided their creation in those final, careful months before the world above changed forever. The thin folder that would complete Elena's understanding bore no corporate letterhead or official designation, only a handwritten label in faded ink: Commonwealth, Continuities, Field Observations, 2287 to 2290. As deep night settled over the archive, the preservation lamps cast their steady amber glow across pages that would transform her investigation from historical discovery into living testimony, revealing how the collaborative technologies developed by RobCo and Vault-Tec continued to serve human communities throughout the Commonwealth with the same patient dedication that had guided their creation in those final, careful months before the world changed forever. Elena opened the folder to discover not corporate documentation, but field reports from Brotherhood scribes, settlement technicians, and community leaders who had encountered and maintained pre-war collaborative systems without understanding their full historical significance. The documents varied in format: hand-copied diagrams beside typed summaries, field notes beside radio transcripts, photographs pasted with careful glue lines that had browned at the edges, creating a bridge laid out in paper between the world that had planned and the world that had learned to continue. She began with a Brotherhood field report, dated November 2287, written by Scribe Halen during a technical survey of Vault 111. The report documented discovery of what Halen had termed anomalous integration protocols between the Vault's environmental systems and external maintenance robotics, noting that automated systems appear designed for cooperative operation rather than centralized control. Halen's technical analysis revealed sophisticated coordination between atmospheric management and robotic maintenance that had continued functioning across 2 centuries, adapting to post-war conditions while maintaining their original commitment to supporting human communities rather than imposing technological constraints. Elena discovered that Sparrow protocols had evolved into the communication backbone for settlement networks throughout the Commonwealth, their principles of transparency and consent creating something that felt almost ceremonial in its careful implementation. A collection of settlement logs described practices that had emerged organically from the pre-war frameworks she had been tracing. At Vault 81, twice each week for an hour at dusk, the Vault announced a window spoken aloud in the atrium and posted on terminals by the gate. Observation window open. Neighbors invited to review water recycler metrics. Anyone passing could see the numbers, trust the numbers, ask questions about resource management and system performance. When the window closed, someone wrote, "Thank you. We hear you," maintaining the neighborly etiquette that had guided Sparrow's original implementation. The practice had spread by imitation and story rather than decree. Elena found documentation of a caravan relay near Bunker Hill, where 2 settlements had adapted the same etiquette to share crop blight data over low-power radio networks. The operator announced in a clear voice, "Glass wall open. We are looking at leaf spot counts, not names." After each session, a small packet traveled with the caravan, a ribbon of paper with the day's numbers and the date stamped in blue ink, the stamp carved from a found bottle cap with a sparrow shape chipped into it. Elena traced the tiny bird with her fingertip, thinking of seals and promises, and how symbols survive when their original offices are gone. A Minutemen engineering report from Preston Garvey's technical team revealed how pre-war collaborative technologies had provided the foundation for post-war community coordination. The report described restoration work at Sanctuary Hills, where pre-war automation systems had been discovered still operating in stewardship mode, providing environmental monitoring and basic maintenance while awaiting human authorization for any significant changes. During a seasonal brownout, the settlement had fallen into what the old manuals called lamplight mode, without panic. Vents held their last comfortable setting, doors went heavier but never stubborn, and a chalkboard by the central house listed the day's manual procedures. Water at noon, hoses, not pumps. Warm the small room, not the hall. Read early. When power steadied, someone had drawn a small sparrow on the board's corner and written, "Thank you for waiting." Elena found photographs from Grey Garden, where Mr. Handy units tended hydroponics beneath a roof patched with Vault-Tec panels and RobCo servo track segments. The integrated systems had required only small kindnesses to behave better. Baffles adjusted for gentler breezes that reduced plant stress and improved taste. A visiting technician had noted in the margin, "Baffles adjusted for gentler breeze. Tomatoes less stressed. Taste improved," underlining the last two words, not for emphasis, but for shared pleasure in how technical refinement could enhance daily life. The field reports revealed that many post-war engineers and technicians had unconsciously adopted the collaborative principles embedded in pre-war systems, creating networks of mutual support that transcended settlement boundaries while preserving community independence. Elena discovered documentation of technical exchange protocols developed by Commonwealth engineers that closely paralleled the reciprocity schedules she had found in corporate archives. Regular knowledge-sharing sessions, coordinated resource distribution, and collaborative problem-solving approaches that served regional needs while respecting local preferences. A railroad technical report provided evidence of how pre-war ethical frameworks continued to influence contemporary technology development. Tinker Tom had documented discovery of consent cascade protocols in pre-war systems that required explicit community approval for any significant changes to automated infrastructure, noting that these protocols reflected design philosophy that puts people first. The railroad had incorporated similar approaches into their communication networks, preserving individual privacy while enabling necessary coordination of liberation activities through adaptation of Sparrow's glass wall principles. Elena traced connections between pre-war innovations and current Commonwealth infrastructure through technical specifications that showed remarkable continuity of design principles. Settlement water purification systems throughout the Commonwealth utilized modular designs that matched the collaborative approaches from Project Convergence documentation, with manual overrides positioned at eye level and community-controlled configuration options that preserved local autonomy while enabling technical coordination across settlement networks. At Diamond City, a night operator had written a margin proverb above a terminal that Elena recognized from Jonathan Moreno's handwriting years before. Trust accrues in small, comprehensible steps. The phrase had been traced over by different hands until it darkened to permanence, becoming wisdom passed between shifts. The documentation revealed how integrated automation systems continued to support human communities in ways their original designers had intended. At Oberlin Station, a maintenance board showed rotating names under the heading Steward's Circle. No one served twice in a season, following governance patterns that matched the pre-war frameworks Elena had discovered. The rules beside it were simple and familiar. No surprises, plain language for changes. Listen before touching. Underneath, hooks held visitation stethoscopes and a small tin of earplugs someone had labeled for the shy. Improvisation that maintained the spirit of careful attention to community needs. Elena found evidence that the apparent conspiracy between RobCo and Vault-Tec had actually created a legacy of collaborative innovation that continued to benefit human communities across the Commonwealth in ways that transcended corporate boundaries. Settlement leaders from major communities had independently developed governance approaches that balanced technological capability with human autonomy, following patterns that matched the philosophical frameworks developed by pre-war corporate ethicists without conscious knowledge of that historical foundation. Where settlements lacked original components, networks supplied patterns. Caravans carried hand-copied guides with titles softened by use. If the door is heavier today, when water sounds strange, how to ask without alarms. In many places, the sparrow seal had been recut in linoleum or bone, pressed into wax over bundles of notes that communities kept in dry places. The seals did not enforce secrecy. They marked care, continuing the tradition of transparent stewardship that had guided the original collaboration. New systems built in the Commonwealth's long recovery showed traces from the old philosophies. A wind-driven pump in Nordhagen had been set to evening reading, comfort, its vane trimmed by hand, until the room provided what the words asked. A workshop in Lexington had backfitted a mister, handy they nicknamed Hawthorne, with invitation protocols, so the unit would ask before lifting or cleaning. We did not remove its capability, their notes explained. We put it on the same manners we ask of ourselves. Such adaptations were not metrics in any corporate sense, but they were what people remembered and valued. Elena discovered that Sparrow protocols had proven remarkably adaptable for post-war conditions, enabling secure communication between communities while preserving each settlement's autonomy over local affairs. The protocol's emphasis on transparency and consent had created communication networks that served regional coordination without enabling centralized control, supporting the kind of voluntary cooperation that had made Minutemen restoration efforts possible across the fractured landscape of the present. As Elena prepared her notes for the final integration of her discoveries, she reflected on how the collaborative technologies had created enduring value that served human communities across changing circumstances. The gentle hum of the archive's climate control systems provided steady accompaniment, a mechanical whisper that had itself become part of this ongoing story of preservation and continuity. She had traced connections from mysterious maintenance tags through technical specifications, financial coordination, human relationships, philosophical frameworks, and practical implementation to arrive at living legacy. Not corporate malfeasance, but unprecedented cooperation that had created lasting benefits for human communities. The archive settled into deeper quiet as Elena arranged her materials for the final phase of investigation. Outside, the Commonwealth continued its patient work of recovery, guided by principles and practices that had traveled 2 centuries without losing their essential commitment to human welfare. The transition to her final reflections would integrate these discoveries into understanding of how ethical technology development could create systems that served human flourishing across generations. Their collaborative vision continuing to guide Commonwealth communities in ways that honored both human needs and technological capabilities. Elena reached for a fresh page, feeling the weight of the pen, ready to assemble her closing thoughts on how apparent rivals had created frameworks for cooperation that transcended corporate boundaries to become part of the Commonwealth's enduring infrastructure for community support and mutual aid. The fresh page settled beneath Elena's careful hand as she prepared to assemble the threads of discovery that had transformed a routine archival investigation into profound understanding. The gentle hum of the archive's climate control systems provided its familiar, soothing backdrop, a mechanical whisper that had carried her through each stage of this patient work, from mysterious maintenance tags to comprehensive revelation of collaborative wisdom that transcended corporate boundaries. As deep night settled over the restored basement of the Boston Public Library, the preservation lamps cast their steady amber glow across documents that had revealed not conspiracy in any malicious sense, but rather an unprecedented experiment in cooperation, guided by genuine concern for human welfare. Elena began her summary by tracing the elegant arc of discovery that had brought her from surface anomalies to systematic understanding. The sparrow designation that had first caught her attention, nestled quietly in a routine maintenance report, had proven to be not a code for corporate espionage, but rather an acronym embodying principles of transparency and consent, secure preservation and read-only window. The protocols represented collaborative wisdom, a recognition that the challenges facing humanity required cooperation, that transcended traditional competitive boundaries, while preserving the dignity and autonomy that made communities resilient across changing circumstances. The investigation had revealed how apparent competition could mask deeper cooperation, with corporate rivalry providing necessary cover for collaborative innovation that served both business interests and social good. Elena reflected on the sophisticated reciprocity schedules and governance structures that had allowed RobCo and Vault-Tec to share resources, information, and expertise, while maintaining their individual market identities. The financial harmonies she had traced showed not deception, but rather careful coordination through intermediaries like Prometheus Strategic Solutions, enabling both corporations to pursue ambitious technological goals that neither could have accomplished independently. Elena paused to consider the human elements that had made such unprecedented cooperation possible. Engineers like Jonathan Moreno and Sarah Chen had built bridges across corporate boundaries, carrying specialized knowledge and shared commitments to human-centered design. The philosophers and ethicists employed by both corporations had developed frameworks for technological stewardship that prioritized long-term human welfare over short-term competitive advantage. Internal advocacy groups had ensured that collaborative innovation remained accountable to the communities it was designed to serve, creating what the documents had called institutional conscience that aligned business innovation with social values. The philosophical frameworks Elena had discovered represented practical wisdom translated into concrete design decisions. The emphasis on compatible innovation and graduated adaptation had created technologies that enhanced human capabilities while preserving autonomy and choice. Project Convergence had embodied these principles through comprehensive integration that supported human communities while preserving their ability to modify or discontinue technological systems as their understanding and needs evolved. Manual overrides positioned at eye level, graceful degradation protocols, and community-controlled configuration options had ensured that sophisticated automation served rather than governed human communities. Elena traced connections between the testing grounds she had documented and the ethical commitment to serving human needs, rather than merely demonstrating technical capability. The pilot communities at Hawthorne, Riverside Gardens, and Millbrook had participated not as experimental subjects, but as collaborative partners whose insights had shaped system implementations through careful attention to lived experience. Feedback, like, please, let the kitchen lights greet us, not anticipate us, had resulted in technical refinements that prioritized human comfort and social routines over engineering convenience, creating systems that adapted to human preferences rather than requiring human adaptation to technological constraints. The final preparations Elena had examined revealed remarkable attention to creating resilient systems that would continue serving human communities regardless of external circumstances. The careful coordination of manufacturing, installation, training, and deployment had reflected understanding that technological systems needed to function reliably across conditions that could not be predicted or controlled. The documentation from those final October days in 2077, just days before the Great War, showed both corporations committed to creating systems that would preserve essential capabilities even when sophisticated automation became unavailable. Elena's investigation of contemporary Commonwealth communities had shown how the collaborative principles embedded in pre-war systems continued to guide post-war technology development. Settlement networks throughout the Commonwealth utilized communication protocols, governance structures, and technical coordination approaches that closely paralleled the frameworks developed by RobCo and Vault-Tec. At Vault 81, the evening observation windows maintained Sparrow's neighborly etiquette. At Diamond City, Moreno's phrase, "Trust accrues in small, comprehensible steps," had been traced over by different hands until it became permanent wisdom. The legacy of collaborative innovation had transcended corporate boundaries to become part of the Commonwealth's enduring infrastructure for mutual support and community building. As Elena prepared to secure the documents and organize her research notes for sharing with other Commonwealth libraries, she understood that her archival work participated in the same tradition of careful stewardship that had guided the original collaboration. The patient attention to preservation and documentation that characterized her profession served the same essential function as the SPRROW protocols and ethical frameworks she had discovered, ensuring that valuable knowledge would continue serving human communities across changing circumstances, with transparency and accessibility that honored both the fragility of information and its importance for community welfare. Elena reflected on how the archive's preservation systems themselves embodied the collaborative principles she had been investigating. The climate control that maintained steady temperature and humidity, the lighting that provided illumination without stressing paper fibers, the careful storage that protected documents while keeping them accessible, all reflected the same attention to supportive infrastructure that enhanced human capabilities while preserving autonomy and choice. The gentle hum of mechanical systems provided comfort and continuity, reminding her that some stories revealed their deepest truths only through patient, careful attention to quiet details that connected past wisdom with present needs. The apparent conspiracy between RobCo and Vault-Tec had revealed itself as something far more valuable. Collaborative wisdom that had recognized how technological stewardship could honor human dignity while providing necessary support systems for community flourishing. Their partnership had demonstrated that apparent competitors could become partners when guided by shared commitment to community benefit. Their technological achievements continuing to serve Commonwealth settlements through principles of transparency, consent, and human-centered design that had proven more durable than the corporations that created them. Elena secured the documents with the same careful attention she had brought to their examination, ensuring that each folder was properly protected while remaining accessible for future researchers. She prepared her research notes for distribution to the network of Commonwealth libraries and archives, understanding that knowledge shared openly served communities more effectively than information hoarded for individual advantage. The collaborative spirit that had guided RobCo and Vault-Tec would continue through the patient work of archivists, librarians, and researchers who maintained the infrastructure of memory and learning that enabled communities to build on past achievements. As Elena completed her documentation and prepared to close the archive for the evening, the preservation systems continued their gentle mechanical breathing, maintaining the steady environmental conditions that would protect these fragile witnesses to collaborative innovation. The amber lamps settled into their deeper overnight rhythm, their glow a promise that documents would remain safe until tomorrow brought fresh opportunities for discovery and understanding. The gentle hum of preservation provided comfort and continuity, a mechanical lullaby that connected the careful work of the present with the thoughtful planning of the past. Elena switched off her research terminal and adjusted the preservation lamps for overnight operation. As she prepared to leave the archive, she carried with her not just research findings, but renewed understanding of how patient work in service of human welfare could create connections across time and circumstance. The collaboration between RobCo and Vault-Tec had demonstrated that cooperation could transcend competition when human welfare remained the guiding purpose. Their shared vision, creating technologies that continued to serve Commonwealth communities with the same patient dedication that had guided their creation in those final, careful months before the world changed forever. The gentle hum of understanding would continue through the quiet hours, preserving and protecting the documentary evidence of how apparent rivals had created frameworks for cooperation that became part of the Commonwealth's enduring infrastructure for community support and mutual aid. Some stories reveal their deepest truths only through patient attention to quiet details, and tonight, the archive held such a story like a kept promise, a reminder that the most important discoveries often emerge not from dramatic revelations, but from sustained attention to the gentle connections that bind past wisdom with present needs. The rooms settled into deeper quiet as Elena secured the final documents, the preservation systems maintaining their patient vigil. There is comfort in this mechanical constancy, in systems designed to serve without governing, to support without controlling. The gentle hum continues, a lullaby written in careful engineering and sustained by shared commitment to preservation. Rest well, knowing that some promises transcend time, that collaborative wisdom endures, and that the quiet work of understanding continues through the peaceful hours until dawn, brings fresh light to illuminate new discoveries, waiting patiently in the archives of human knowledge and care.